The harsh winter wind howled across the plains as Willow Nielsen clutched her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, her knuckles white with cold and fear. The stagecoach had deposited her unceremoniously in Naco, Arizona territory, with nothing but a battered trunk and a letter promising marriage to a man she'd never met. It was 1885, and at 22, Willow had traveled farther from her Boston home than she'd ever imagined possible. The bank collapse that had claimed her father's life and her family's fortune had left her with few choices. Becoming a mail-order bride had seemed the only path forward after her mother succumbed to consumption just months after her father's suicide. "Miss, you planning on standing there till you freeze solid?" The stagecoach driver's gruff voice broke through her thoughts as he set her trunk down beside her. "No, I'm meeting someone." Her voice sounded small even to her own ears as she scanned the dusty main street. There was no sign of Marshall Reed, the cattle rancher who had corresponded with her for 6 months before sending train fare. The driver shrugged. "Suit yourself. Post office is that way if you need to send word to anyone." With a tip of his hat, he climbed back onto his seat and snapped the reins. Willow stood alone as the stagecoach disappeared in a cloud of dust. The letter had been specific. Marshall Reed would meet her at noon on the 15th of November. She pulled out her father's pocket watch. It was nearly 1 o'clock, the weight of her situation pressed down on her shoulders. Everything she owned was in the trunk at her feet. The money sewn into her petticoat would last a week at most, if Marshall Reed had changed his mind. "Miss Nielsen," Willow turned to find a tall man with broad shoulders and a weathered face approaching. His dark hair was partially hidden under a wide-brimmed hat, and his eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, regarded her with concern. "Yes, I'm Willow Nielsen," she managed, relief flooding through her. "Matthew Reynolds." He extended a gloved hand. "Marshall Reed asked me to meet you." Her heart sank. "Mr. Reed isn't coming." Matthew's expression darkened. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news, Miss Nielsen. Marshall Reed passed away 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him quickly." The world seemed to tilt beneath Willow's feet. I see." Her voice was barely audible as the last of her hopes crumbled. "No home, no husband, no future. I'm his neighbor," Matthew continued. "He asked me to look after his affairs, including you should you still arrive." Willow blinked back tears, determined not to break down in the middle of a strange town. "What am I to do now?" Matthew studied her for a long moment. "For now, let's get you somewhere warm. We can discuss options after you've rested." He gestured toward her trunk. "May I?" She nodded, watching as he effortlessly lifted the trunk that contained everything she had left in the world. As she followed him down the dusty street, Willow realized that hope was indeed all she had left, a fragile, flickering flame that refused to die despite the crushing blow she'd just received. Matthew led her to a modest building with a sign reading, Naco Hotel. Inside, a plump woman with graying hair greeted them with a curious smile. "Mrs. Holloway," Matthew said, setting down the trunk. "This is Miss Nielsen. She'll need a room for a few days." Mrs. Holloway's eyes widened slightly. "The mail-order bride, but I thought..." "Yes," Matthew cut in. "We'll sort everything out. For now, she needs rest." "Of course," Mrs. Holloway said, her expression softening as she took in Willow's pale face. "Come with me, dear." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Willow sank onto the edge of the bed after Mrs. Holloway left. "I'll come back this evening," Matthew said, lingering in the doorway. "We can talk then about arrangements." "Thank you," Willow replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "For your kindness to a stranger." Something flickered in his blue eyes. "Marshall was a good man. He spoke highly of you in your letters." He hesitated. "Rest now." After he left, Willow finally allowed her tears to fall. Her dreams of a new beginning lay shattered around her. She'd come west with nothing but hope and the promise of a fresh start. Now even that was gone. Hours later, a knock at her door roused her from fitful sleep. She smoothed her rumpled dress and opened the door to find Matthew waiting with a tray of food. "Mrs. Holloway thought you might be hungry," he said, placing the tray on the small table by the window. "That's very kind." Willow hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aroma of beef stew reached her. Matthew remained standing as she sat down to eat. "I've been thinking about your situation." Willow braced herself, expecting to hear about an orphanage or domestic position, the typical fates of women left destitute. "Marshall's ranch is 5 miles outside town," Matthew continued. "It's not large, but it's good land. He left no family, and his will was clear: everything goes to his intended wife." The spoon paused halfway to Willow's mouth. "I don't understand." "The ranch is yours, Miss Nielsen. Marshall wanted to give you a home, and despite his passing, that wish can still be fulfilled." Willow set down her spoon, stunned. "Mine, but we weren't married." "The will specified to Willow Nielsen, my intended. Judge Parker reviewed it after Marshall's death and found it binding." Matthew's expression was unreadable. "Of course, a woman alone on a ranch is inappropriate," Willow finished. Understanding the unspoken concern, Matthew shifted uncomfortably. "It's not just that, it's dangerous and difficult work." "What are my alternatives, Mr. Reynolds?" His gaze met hers directly. "You could sell it. I'd make you a fair offer. And then return east, perhaps, or find a position here in town." Willow considered this as she took another bite of stew. Returning east meant admitting defeat. It meant returning to a place where her family's name was tarnished by her father's financial failure. The thought made her stomach clench. "I'd like to see this ranch before making any decisions," she said finally. Surprise flickered across Matthew's face. "I can take you tomorrow if you wish." "Thank you, I would appreciate that." Matthew nodded, his hat in his hands. "Miss Nielsen, I should warn you. It's not what you might be expecting." Willow met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Reynolds, very little in my life has turned out as expected. I've learned to adjust my expectations accordingly." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Then I'll collect you at 9 tomorrow morning." He placed his hat back on his head and turned to leave. "Mr. Reynolds," Willow called after him. "Why are you helping me?" He paused at the door. "Marshall was my friend, and—" He seemed to search for words. "No one should face losing everything alone. I know something about that." Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, leaving Willow to wonder about the man who had appeared in her life at her lowest moment. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Willow dressed in her most practical clothes, a navy blue traveling dress with a high collar and sturdy boots. She'd spent a restless night considering her options, but the truth was she had precious few. Matthew arrived promptly at 9, driving a wagon with 2 sturdy horses. He helped her up onto the wooden seat with a strong, sure hand. "It's about an hour's ride," he explained as they set off. "The road gets rough in places." As they left Naco behind, Willow took in the landscape. It was nothing like the lush greenery of Massachusetts. The terrain was rugged, with sagebrush and cacti dotting the red earth. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks sharp against the clear blue sky. "It's beautiful," she said softly, in a wild sort of way. Matthew glanced at her in surprise. "Most Easterners find it harsh." "It is harsh," Willow agreed, "but honest. It doesn't pretend to be anything it's not." They fell into companionable silence as the wagon rattled along. Occasionally, Matthew would point out landmarks or name a distant mountain peak. Willow found herself studying him when he wasn't looking: the strong profile, the capable hands that held the reins, the way his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. "There," Matthew said eventually, gesturing ahead. "Reed Ranch." Willow leaned forward to see a small homestead nestled in a valley. A modest wooden house stood alongside a barn and corral. A creek wound its way past the structures, and a small garden plot lay fallow in the winter chill. "It's not much," Matthew said, almost apologetically. "It's a home," Willow replied, emotion thickening her voice. As they approached, she noted the weathered appearance of the buildings. The house needed paint, and one of the corral fence posts was leaning precariously. Matthew helped her down from the wagon and led her toward the house. "Marshall built it himself about 5 years ago. Its sound just needs some care." Inside, the house was simple but surprisingly spacious. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with an iron stove, 2 small bedrooms, and a lean-to that served as a washroom. "He was preparing for your arrival," Matthew said, gesturing to one of the bedrooms where a patchwork quilt covered the bed and curtains hung at the window. "Mrs. Holloway helped with the woman's touches. Willow ran her hand over the quilt, imagining the man she'd never met preparing a home for her. His letters had been straightforward but kind, speaking of practical matters and his hopes for a partnership based on mutual respect. "Why didn't you tell me immediately about the inheritance?" Willow asked suddenly, turning to face Matthew. He leaned against the doorframe, considering her question. "I wanted to give you time to adjust to the news of Marshall's death, and," he hesitated, "I wanted to measure your character before telling you about the property." "And what have you determined about my character, Mr. Reynolds?" There was a hint of challenge in her voice. "That you're stronger than you appear," he said simply. "Marshall chose well." Willow felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "I still don't understand why he would leave everything to a woman he'd never met." Marshall was a practical man. He wanted his life's work to continue, not be sold off in pieces. Matthew straightened. "Would you like to see the rest?" They toured the barn where a few head of cattle were sheltered for winter, the chicken coop that stood empty, and the corral where a single horse watched them curiously. "That's Penny," Matthew said. "Marshall's mare, gentle as they come." Willow approached the fence and the chestnut mare ambled over, nudging her hand. "Hello, Penny," she murmured, stroking the horse's soft nose. "She likes you," Matthew observed, a note of approval in his voice. By the time they'd completed their tour, Willow's mind was racing with possibilities. The ranch was modest but self-sufficient. With hard work, it could provide a living. "What do you think?" Matthew asked as they stood by the wagon, preparing to return to town. "I think." Willow took a deep breath. "I think I'd like to stay." Matthew's eyebrows rose. "Stay? You mean live here alone? Is there a law against it?" "No law, but there's common sense. Ranching isn't something you can learn from books, Miss Nielsen." "I'm aware of that," she replied evenly. "Which is why I'd like to propose an arrangement." Matthew crossed his arms, waiting. "I need someone to teach me," Willow continued. "And I suspect the ranch needs more than one person to run it properly. If you're willing, I'd like to hire you to help me, at least until I can manage on my own." Matthew stared at her for a long moment. "You're serious?" "Completely serious." He shook his head, a mix of disbelief and something like respect in his expression. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." "Then tell me," she challenged. "Explain exactly what I'm facing if I choose to stay." "Backbreaking work from dawn till dusk. Freezing winters, scorching summers. Predators both animal and human that will test your resolve. Isolation that can drive a person mad. Failure that can mean starvation." His voice was hard. "This isn't a game, Miss Nielsen." "I never thought it was," Willow replied quietly. "But neither is surviving when you've lost everything. I've done that once already, Mr. Reynolds. I'd rather face the wilderness than return to a world that has nothing left for me." Matthew studied her, his blue eyes intense. "And if I refuse to help, then I'll find someone who will. Or I'll learn through trial and error. Either way, I'm staying." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Matthew sighed. 3 months, he said. "I'll give you 3 months of my time. If by then you still want to stay, we'll renegotiate." Relief washed over Willow. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he warned. "You might curse my name before the first week is out." Despite his stern words, Willow thought she detected a hint of admiration in his eyes. As they climbed back into the wagon, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in a long time: excitement for the future. 3 days later, Willow moved into Reed Ranch. Matthew had helped her purchase supplies in town, his practical knowledge guiding her choices. Seed for planting, tools, basic foodstuffs, and a rifle that he insisted she learn to use. "Your nearest neighbor besides me is 10 miles away," he'd explained. "You need to be able to protect yourself." Now, as she unpacked her meager belongings in what would have been her marital bedroom, Willow felt the weight of her decision. The house seemed to creak with emptiness around her. Outside, the wind whispered through the bare branches of the cottonwood trees by the creek. Matthew had returned to his own ranch but promised to arrive at first light the next day to begin her education in ranching. For tonight, she was truly alone. After a simple supper of beans and bacon cooked on the iron stove, Willow sat by the fireplace, a letter to Marshall Reed in her hands. She had written it on her first night in Naco, not knowing what else to do with her grief and gratitude for a man she would never meet. "I will make something of this place," she whispered, committing her promise to the flickering flames as she fed the letter into the fire. "I won't waste the chance you've given me." As promised, Matthew arrived as dawn was breaking across the eastern sky. Willow was already awake, having spent a restless night listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home. "Morning," he greeted, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Coffee." "I've just made some," Willow replied, pouring him a cup from the pot on the stove. Matthew took a sip and nodded approvingly. "First lesson of ranch life, good coffee matters. What's the second lesson? Proper dress." He eyed her practical but still decidedly feminine attire. "You'll need trousers for some of the work." Willow blinked in surprise. "Trousers? But out here, practicality trumps propriety," Matthew said firmly. "You can wear a skirt when you go to town for church socials." The mention of church reminded Willow of the letter Marshall had written about the small community of ranchers and their monthly gatherings for worship and socializing. She wondered if she would be welcomed without her intended husband. "I brought you these," Matthew continued, retrieving a bundle from outside. "They're old ones of mine, but Mrs. Holloway altered them yesterday. They should do until we can get you proper work clothes." Willow accepted the bundle, touched by the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. "Thank you." "Get changed. We've got cattle to feed, a chicken coop to repair, and fences to mend before noon." By midday, Willow's muscles ached in places she hadn't known existed. They had mucked out the barn, fed the small herd of cattle, and begun repairs on the chicken coop. Matthew worked steadily, explaining each task as they went. "Tomorrow we'll head into town to buy chickens," he said as they hammered the last board into place. "Eggs are good for trading, and you'll need the protein." Willow wiped sweat from her brow despite the cool winter air. "How many cattle are there?" 15 head, including 2 milking cows, not much of a herd, but enough to start with. Marshall was building slowly, doing it right. "And the land, 160 acres. 80 of good grazing land, the rest mixed forest and creek bottom." "The water rights are solid." Marshall made sure of that. Willow nodded, trying to absorb all the information. "And your ranch," Matthew's expression shifted slightly, "about twice the size, just over the ridge to the north." He pointed toward a distant rise. "Been in my family for 2 generations." "You've lived here your whole life, born and raised." Something in his tone discouraged further questions about his past. As the days turned into weeks, Willow found herself falling into a rhythm. Each morning began before dawn with feeding and milking. Then came the day's main tasks: mending, cleaning, planting the early spring garden, learning to ride Penny with confidence. Matthew was a patient but demanding teacher. He never coddled her or suggested a task might be too difficult. Instead, he demonstrated, explained, and then expected her to try. "You won't learn by watching," he said when she hesitated to mount Penny for the first time. "You learn by doing, and sometimes by falling." She did fall more than once, but each time she got back up, determined to master whatever skill he was teaching. The satisfaction of successfully completing a task, whether it was delivering a calf or fixing a leaky roof, made the bruises and exhaustion worthwhile. February gave way to March, bringing the first hints of spring to the Arizona landscape. Wildflowers began to dot the hills, and the days grew noticeably longer. Willow's chicken coop now housed a dozen hens that provided eggs daily, and her garden showed the first green shoots pushing through the soil. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a day of repairing fences, Willow realized Matthew was watching her with an odd expression. "What is it?" she asked. "You've changed," he said simply. Willow looked down at her calloused hands. "I suppose I have." "Your hands aren't what I meant," Matthew clarified. "It's in your eyes. When you first arrived, you looked haunted, like someone who'd been running so long they'd forgotten how to stop." The observation hit uncomfortably close to home. "And now you look like you belong here." He said it matter-of-factly, but something in his voice made her heart beat faster. "I feel like I belong," she admitted. For the first time in a long while, Matthew nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. "The church social is this Sunday. Might be a good time for you to meet some of the other ranchers and their families." Will they accept me, a woman alone, taking over a man's ranch? Some will, some won't, Matthew said honestly, but they're good people overall, and you've proven yourself hardworking. Will you come with me? The question slipped out before Willow could consider its implications. Matthew's eyes met hers, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Yes, he said finally, I'll come with you. The Sunday social was held at the small clapboard church on the outskirts of Naco. Willow wore her best dress, a blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and spent extra time arranging her hair. It was vanity, perhaps, but she wanted to make a good impression. Matthew arrived in a clean shirt and vest, his usual rough appearance somewhat softened. He helped her into the wagon, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. You look nice, he said, the compliment clearly unpracticed but sincere. As do you, Willow replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. The church was already filling with families when they arrived. Heads turned as Matthew escorted Willow inside, curiosity evident on many faces. Matthew Reynolds, as I live and breathe, called a robust man with a silver beard. And who's this lovely lady, Sheriff Tanner? Matthew nodded. This is Miss Willow Nielsen. She's taken over Marshal Reed's place. The sheriff's eyebrows rose. The mail-order bride, heard you decided to stay on. Brave decision, miss. Thank you, Willow said, meeting his gaze steadily. It was the right one for me. The sheriff studied her for a moment, then broke into a grin. Well, any friend of Matthew's is welcome here. Come meet the missus. Throughout the morning, Willow was introduced to what seemed like the entire community. Some, like the sheriff and his wife, were openly welcoming. Others regarded her with thinly veiled skepticism. A woman running a ranch, she overheard one man mutter to another. She'll be selling out by summer. Or looking for a husband to take over, his companion replied with a chuckle. Willow pretended not to hear, but the comments stung. She had worked tirelessly for weeks, learning everything she could about ranching. The thought of giving up now seemed unthinkable. After the service came a communal meal, with tables set up under cottonwood trees. Willow found herself seated beside Mrs. Holloway from the hotel and across from a stern-faced woman introduced as Ida Parsons, whose husband ran the general store. How are you finding ranch life, Miss Nielsen, Mrs. Holloway asked kindly. Challenging but rewarding, Willow replied honestly. There's something satisfying about working with your hands and seeing the results. HMPH, Mrs. Parsons interjected. It's not proper work for a lady. You should be looking to marry, not playing at being a rancher. Willow took a careful breath before responding. I came west to marry, Mrs. Parsons. Fate had other plans. Now I'm making the best of my circumstances. With considerable help from Matthew Reynolds, I hear, Mrs. Parsons said with a meaningful look. People are talking. People often talk about things they don't understand. Matthew's voice came from behind Willow. He set his plate down beside hers and took a seat. Miss Nielsen is my neighbor and my friend, nothing more, nothing less. The firmness in his voice silenced Mrs. Parsons, but Willow felt a strange disappointment at his words. Over the past weeks, she'd begun to hope that perhaps there was something growing between them beyond mere friendship or a business arrangement. The rest of the meal passed pleasantly enough, with conversation turning to upcoming spring planting and the county fair in May. Willow found herself genuinely enjoying the company of her new neighbors, despite the occasional skeptical glance. As they prepared to leave, the sheriff pulled Matthew aside for a private conversation. Willow waited by the wagon, admiring the spring blossoms that had begun to appear on the fruit trees around the church. Miss Nielsen. A deep voice drew her attention. A tall man with a carefully groomed mustache and expensive clothes stood before her. Clayton Blackburn. I own the Double B Ranch north of here. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Blackburn, Willow replied, noting the man's appraising gaze. I understand you've inherited Marshal Reed's place. He twirled his hat in his hands. Small operation, but good water rights. I'd be interested in discussing a purchase should you ever consider selling. That's very direct, Mr. Blackburn, Willow observed, but I'm not interested in selling. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. A woman alone faces many challenges in this territory. My offer stands should you reconsider. Before Willow could respond, Matthew appeared at her side. "Blackburn," he said, his tone noticeably cooler than it had been with others. "Reynolds." Blackburn nodded curtly. "Just making Miss Nielsen's acquaintance." "And making offers on her land, I imagine," Matthew replied, "just being neighborly." Blackburn's smile tightened. "Good day, Miss Nielsen, I'm sure we'll meet again." As he walked away, Willow turned to Matthew. "I take it you two aren't friends." "Clayton Blackburn isn't friends with anyone unless there's something in it for him," Matthew said grimly. "He's been trying to expand his holdings for years, controls most of the water north of here already. And he wants the Reed water rights, among other things." Matthew helped her into the wagon. "Just be careful around him." The ride back to the ranch was quieter than their journey to town had been. Willow sensed Matthew had something on his mind, but he seemed reluctant to speak of it. Finally, as they approached the ranch, he broke the silence. "Sheriff mentioned there have been cattle rustlers working the area, 2 ranches hit in the past month. Should I be worried? Just vigilant. Keep your rifle loaded and your doors locked at night." He glanced at her. "Might be good if I stayed a few nights, just until we're sure they've moved on." The thought of Matthew staying at the ranch sent an unexpected thrill through Willow. "If you think it's necessary. Better safe than sorry." He guided the wagon up to the house. "I'll bring my bedroll over tomorrow." That night, alone in the quiet house, Willow found herself thinking about Matthew Reynolds. He'd come into her life when she had nothing but hope to sustain her. Over the weeks, he'd taught her not just how to run a ranch, but how to believe in herself again. And somewhere along the way, she realized, she'd begun to care for him as more than a teacher or a friend. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had come west to marry one man, and now found herself developing feelings for another, a man who had made it clear at the social that they were nothing more than friends. The next day brought a spring storm, with rain pounding against the windows and wind howling around the eaves. Matthew arrived drenched, his bedroll and saddlebags slung over one shoulder. "Didn't expect it to hit so hard," he said, removing his dripping hat and coat. "Creek's already rising." Willow took his wet things and hung them by the fire. "I've got stew on the stove." "You should change before you catch your death." Matthew disappeared into the second bedroom, emerging a few minutes later in dry clothes, his hair still damp. They ate supper at the small kitchen table, listening to the rain against the roof. 3 months is nearly up," Willow said suddenly. Matthew looked up from his bowl. "Yes, it is, our arrangement. Do you still want to stay?" he asked, his expression unreadable. "Yes," Willow said without hesitation. "This is my home now, but I still have much to learn." Matthew nodded slowly. "You've come farther than I expected." "Truth is, you don't need me for the day-to-day anymore." The thought of not seeing Matthew every day left Willow feeling oddly hollow. "I see," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "Well, I appreciate all you've taught me." "I didn't say I wouldn't help anymore," Matthew clarified. "Just that you've mastered the basics. There's still seasonal work, branding, roundup, harvest that needs more hands than just one." "So you're suggesting a partnership of sorts. I help with the big jobs, you help with mine when needed, neighbors looking out for each other." It wasn't what Willow had secretly hoped for, but it was practical. "That sounds reasonable." The evening wore on, with the storm intensifying outside. Matthew checked the barn and the animals one last time before they turned in for the night. In the close confines of the small house, Willow was acutely aware of his presence in the next room as she lay in bed listening to the rain. A sudden crash woke her sometime in the darkest hours of the night. Willow sat up, heart pounding, unsure what had roused her. Then she heard it again, a splintering sound from the direction of the barn. Her door opened, and Matthew stood there, rifle in hand. "Stay here," he whispered. "Lock the door behind me." "What is it?" "Not sure. Could be the wind, could be trouble." His expression was grim in the dim light of the lamp he carried. Willow reached for her own rifle, which she kept propped beside the bed. "I'm coming with you." "Willow, it's my ranch," she said firmly. "My responsibility." Something flickered in Matthew's eyes, respect, perhaps, or concern. "Stay behind me, then." They slipped out into the storm, the rain immediately soaking them as they made their way to the barn. The door hung partially open, swinging in the wind, the source of the crashing sound. Matthew raised his rifle, moving cautiously toward the entrance. Willow followed, her own weapon ready, though her hands trembled slightly. Inside, the barn was dark except for Matthew's lamp. The horses nickered nervously, and somewhere in the shadows, something moved. "Who's there?" Matthew called, his voice hard. "Show yourself." A figure emerged from behind a stall, a young boy, no more than 15, soaking wet and wide-eyed with fear. "Don't shoot," he cried, raising his hands. "Please?" Matthew lowered his rifle slightly. "What are you doing in our barn, boy?" "Just looking for shelter from the storm," the youth stammered. "Didn't mean no harm." Willow studied the boy. His clothes were ragged, his face thin with hunger. "Where are your parents?" "Dead, madam. Pa last winter, ma in February." His voice cracked. "Been on my own since." Matthew and Willow exchanged a glance. "What's your name?" Matthew asked, his tone softening slightly. "Tommy, sir, Tommy Logan." "Well, Tommy Logan," Willow said decisively, "you can't stay in the barn on a night like this. Come to the house. We'll get you dry and fed." Matthew looked like he might object, but after a moment he nodded. "Come on, then." In the warm kitchen, the boy wolfed down leftover stew while Willow made coffee. Matthew watched him carefully, his initial suspicion gradually giving way to something like compassion. "Where were you headed?" he asked when Tommy had eaten his fill. "Nowhere particular," the boy admitted. "Just away from Tucson, thought I might find work on a ranch somewhere." "Ever worked cattle before?" Tommy straightened. "Yes, sir. Pa had a small spread before he took sick. I can ride, rope, and mend fence with the best of 'em." Matthew glanced at Willow, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly. "We might have some work for you," Matthew said. "Temporary, mind you, just until you decide where you're headed." The boy's face lit up. "Really?" "I'd work hard, sir, madam, real hard." "We'll see," Matthew replied, but Willow could tell he'd already made up his mind. "For tonight, you can sleep by the fire." After Tommy was settled on a pallet near the hearth, Willow and Matthew retreated to the kitchen. "Do you think it's wise?" she asked quietly. "Taking in a stranger." "He's just a boy," Matthew said, "and we could use the extra hands." He ran a hand through his hair, still damp from the rain. "Besides, everyone deserves a chance." The way he said it made Willow wonder about his own past. "Like the chance Marshall gave me, or the chance you gave me." Matthew's eyes met hers. "Something like that." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Then Matthew cleared his throat. "We should get some sleep. Morning comes early on a ranch." Willow nodded, though sleep was the last thing on her mind. "Good night, Matthew." He hesitated, then reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Good night, Willow." The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle, that Willow found herself breathless. Before she could respond, Matthew had turned and disappeared into his room, leaving her alone with her racing heart and the realization that her feelings for him had grown far deeper than she'd admitted even to herself. Tommy Logan proved to be a hard worker with a quick mind. Over the next few weeks, he became an invaluable help around the ranch, learning Willow's routines and adapting to Matthew's expectations. The temporary arrangement gradually became more permanent as spring advanced toward summer. One evening in late April, as the three of them sat on the porch after supper, Tommy asked the question Willow had been avoiding. "Are you two married?" Willow nearly choked on her coffee. Matthew coughed uncomfortably. "No," Willow managed. "Mr. Reynolds is my neighbor. He's been teaching me about ranching." Tommy looked between them, clearly confused. "But you live here sometimes," he said to Matthew. "Only when there's work to be done," Matthew explained, "or when there might be trouble." The boy considered this. "Folks in town think different. Heard them talking when I went in for supplies yesterday." "What exactly did you hear?" Willow asked, her cheeks warming. Tommy shrugged. "Just that you two were sweet on each other, and some weren't happy about it because you were supposed to marry Mr. Reed." An uncomfortable silence fell over the porch. Willow stared at her hands, unable to look at Matthew. "People will talk," Matthew said finally. "Doesn't make it true." His words stung more than Willow expected. She stood abruptly. "I should check on the new calf." Without waiting for a response, she hurried toward the barn, needing space to collect her thoughts. The young calf, born just days earlier, was nursing contentedly from its mother. Willow leaned against the stall, watching them, trying to calm the turmoil inside her. "Willow." Matthew's voice came from behind her. "We need to talk." She turned to face him, composing her expression. "About what?" "About what Tommy said." Matthew moved closer, his face half in shadow in the dim barn. "About the gossip." "It doesn't matter," Willow said dismissively. "As you said, people will talk. It matters if it harms your reputation." Willow laughed, a brittle sound. "My reputation? I'm a woman living alone on a ranch I inherited from a man I never married. My reputation was in question the moment I decided to stay." "Then maybe we should do something about it," Matthew said, his voice low. Willow's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the uncertainty in his blue eyes. "I'm not good with words, Willow, never have been, but these past months." "Yes." She prompted when he fell silent. "I came to help you because of a promise to a friend," Matthew continued. "I stayed because—" He took a deep breath. "Because somewhere along the way you became important to me, more important than I expected." Willow hardly dared to breathe. "Matthew, let me finish," he said gently. "I've been alone a long time. After my parents died, the ranch became my whole life. I didn't think there was room for anything else. Then you arrived and everything changed." "Changed how?" Willow whispered. Matthew reached out, taking her hand in his. "I find myself looking forward to each day because I know I'll see you. I worry about you when I'm not here. He hesitated. "I think about you all the time." Joy bubbled up inside Willow, threatening to overflow. "I think about you too," she admitted. "More than I should, perhaps." Something shifted in Matthew's expression, hope replacing uncertainty. "Willow, I'm not Marshall Reed. I can't offer you what he might have, but if you could consider—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Consider what?" Willow asked, her voice barely audible. Instead of answering, Matthew leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and over almost before it began. He pulled back, watching her face for a reaction. Willow stood frozen for a moment, startled by the sudden action. Then, following her heart rather than her head, she stepped forward and kissed him back. This time, the kiss deepened, filled with all the unspoken feelings that had been growing between them. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I guess that answers my question," Matthew said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "What question was that?" Willow asked, still dazed from the kiss. "Whether you might consider marrying me instead." The world seemed to stop. "Matthew Reynolds, was that a proposal?" His smile faltered. "A poor one, I suppose. I told you I wasn't good with words." Willow laughed, joy bubbling over. "I don't need fancy words, just honesty." "Then, honestly, Willow Nielsen, I love you. I want to build a life with you, whether on your ranch or mine or somewhere new entirely." He took both her hands in his. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Willow's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." The sound of slow clapping drew their attention to the barn door where Tommy stood grinning. "About time," he said. "Can I be best man?" Matthew and Willow looked at each other and burst into laughter, the tension of the moment breaking. "We haven't discussed details yet," Matthew told the boy, "but I think that could be arranged." "Good," Tommy said with satisfaction, "because I already told Mrs. Holloway you two would be getting hitched before summer, and I'd hate to make a liar of myself." "You did what?" Willow gasped. "Just a hunch," the boy said with a wink before disappearing back toward the house. Left alone again, Matthew drew Willow into his arms. "That boy's too clever by half." "He sees what's important," Willow replied, resting her head against Matthew's chest. "Something I'm learning to do as well." The wedding took place in early June, when the wildflowers carpeted the hills around Naco and the days were long and golden. They held it at the ranch, under the cottonwood trees by the creek. Sheriff Tanner officiated, and nearly everyone from town attended, curious to witness the union of the mail-order bride who'd lost everything but hope and the rancher who'd helped her build a new life. Tommy stood proudly as best man, his ragged clothes replaced by a new suit that Matthew had insisted on buying him. Mrs. Holloway served as Willow's matron of honor, dabbing at her eyes throughout the ceremony. "Do you, Matthew James Reynolds, take Willow Elizabeth Nielsen to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the sheriff asked, his deep voice carrying across the assembled guests. "I do," Matthew replied, his eyes never leaving Willow's face. "And do you, Willow Elizabeth Nielsen, Take Matthew James Reynolds to be your lawfully wedded husband." "I do," Willow said clearly, squeezing Matthew's hands. "Then, by the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife." The sheriff beamed at them. "You may kiss your bride, Matthew." The kiss was sweet and filled with promise, sealed by the applause of their friends and neighbors. Even Mrs. Parsons seemed genuinely pleased, her earlier disapproval forgotten in the face of such obvious happiness. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with dancing and feasting under lantern light. As the night grew late, Matthew found Willow standing alone by the creek, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. Willow leaned into him, savoring his warmth and strength. "Not a single one. I was just thinking about how much has changed since I arrived in Naco." "All for the better, I hope. All for the better," she agreed. "When I stepped off that stagecoach, I had nothing but hope and a promise from a man I'd never met. And now," Willow turned to face him, her heart full, "now I have a home, a purpose, a family." She glanced toward Tommy, who was teaching one of the local girls how to dance. "And a husband I love with all my heart." Matthew's eyes darkened with emotion. "I never expected to find you, Willow Reynolds, but now that I have, I'm never letting you go. I'm counting on that," she whispered before rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Later that night, after the guests had departed and Tommy had tactfully retreated to the bunkhouse, a recent addition to the ranch, Matthew carried Willow over the threshold of their home. No longer Marshall Reed's house, no longer just Willow's refuge, but theirs together, a symbol of the new life they'd created from hope and hard work. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reynolds," Matthew said softly, setting her on her feet in the front room. "I've been home for months," Willow replied, reaching up to touch his face. "I just didn't realize it until you helped me see it." The morning after the wedding dawned clear and beautiful. Willow woke in Matthew's arms, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar yet wonderful sensation. Then memory returned, bringing with it a flood of happiness. "Good morning, wife," Matthew murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning, husband," Willow replied, still marveling at the words. The day's routine awaited animals to feed, chores to complete, but for a little while they lingered, content in the knowledge that they had all their tomorrows to face together. Over breakfast, they discussed practical matters. They decided to maintain both ranches for now, with Matthew's foreman continuing to oversee his property while they lived primarily at Willow's their home. "We should think about expanding," Matthew said as they walked to the barn together. The two properties adjoin at the north corner. Combined, they could support a much larger herd. "And what about Tommy?" Willow asked, watching as the boy efficiently mucked out stalls, whistling as he worked. "What do you think? He's proven himself reliable." "I think," Willow said thoughtfully, "that he deserves a permanent place here if he wants it." Matthew nodded. "I was thinking the same. Boy needs a family as much as he needs a job." That evening, they broached the subject with Tommy. The boy's attempt at nonchalance couldn't hide the hope that flared in his eyes. "You mean I could stay, for good, if that's what you want," Willow said gently. "We can't legally adopt you without your consent," Matthew added, "but you'd be family in all the ways that matter." Tommy swallowed hard. "I'd like that. A lot." "Then it's settled," Willow declared, impulsively hugging the boy. After a moment's hesitation, he hugged her back, then extended a hand to Matthew, who ignored it in favor of a brief, gruff embrace. Summer flowed into autumn, bringing with it the hard work of harvest and the first cattle drive to the railroad. The combined Reynolds herds fetched a good price, allowing for improvements to both properties and the purchase of breeding stock that would strengthen their bloodlines. In late October, a letter arrived from Boston, the first communication Willow had received from the East since her departure nearly a year before. It was from her father's former business partner, informing her that some small investments her father had made separately from his main business had matured. There was a sum of money waiting for her, not a fortune, but enough to make a difference. "What will you do with it?" Matthew asked as they sat by the fire that evening, the letter open between them. Willow considered the question. I'd like to set some aside for Tommy's education if he chooses to pursue one, and perhaps, she hesitated, perhaps we could build an addition to the house. Matthew raised an eyebrow, planning to take in more strays. Not exactly. Willow took a deep breath. I've been meaning to tell you, we're going to need more room by next summer. For a moment, Matthew looked puzzled, then understanding dawned, his expression transforming into wonder. You mean, yes, Willow confirmed, unable to keep from smiling. Dr. Parker confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby. Matthew stared at her in stunned silence, then let out a whoop of joy that startled the dog sleeping by the hearth. In one fluid motion, he pulled Willow to her feet and spun her around, his laughter mingling with hers. Careful, she protested, laughing. Precious cargo, he set her down gently, his hands moving to cradle her still flat stomach. A baby, he whispered, awe in his voice. Our baby. Our baby, Willow echoed, covering his hands with hers. Another blessing I never expected to find in Arizona territory. The news of the coming child spread quickly through the small community. Mrs. Holloway immediately began knitting baby clothes, while Mrs. Parsons, now firmly in the Reynolds camp, organized the other ranchers' wives to prepare a proper layette. Tommy took the news of his impending status as big brother with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. What if the baby doesn't like me? He asked Willow one day as they collected eggs together. The baby will adore you, Willow assured him, and you'll be a wonderful example as they grow. The boy straightened at that, responsibility sitting well on his young shoulders. I'll teach them to ride, he declared. And how to find the best fishing spots in the creek. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing cold nights and occasional snow that melted by midday. The house was warm and snug, with the addition, a nursery and a proper bedroom for Tommy taking shape under Matthew's capable hands. On Christmas Eve, they gathered by the fire. Willow, Matthew, and Tommy, along with Mrs. Holloway, who had accepted their invitation to spend the holiday with them rather than alone at her hotel. I have something for everyone, Tommy announced, producing 3 carefully wrapped packages from behind the tree they had cut and decorated with paper chains and popcorn strings. Mrs. Holloway received a delicately carved wooden spoon, which the boy had made himself. For Matthew, there was a new leather belt, purchased with money Tommy had earned doing odd jobs in town. Willow's gift was last a small, flat package tied with a piece of red ribbon. Inside was a framed pencil drawing of the ranch house, with the 3 of them standing on the porch. In the background, faintly sketched, was a figure Willow recognized as Marshall Reed watching over them. Tommy, she breathed, tears filling her eyes. It's beautiful, but how did you know what Marshall looked like? Asked around town, Tommy explained. Mr. Parker at the dry goods store had a photograph, said Mr. Reed would be happy seeing how things turned out. Willow looked at the drawing through her tears, thinking of the man whose generosity had set her on this path. Yes, she said softly. I believe he would be, later after Mrs. Holloway had retired to the guest room and Tommy to his bed. Willow and Matthew sat alone by the dying fire. I have something for you, Matthew said, reaching into his pocket. It's not much, but he handed her a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a piece of cotton, was a ring set with a single pearl. Matthew, it's lovely, Willow gasped, but I don't understand. I already have a wedding band. This was my mother's, Matthew explained. She always said it was for my wife when I found her. I've been waiting for the right moment to give it to you. Willow slipped the ring onto her right hand, admiring how it caught the firelight. It's perfect, thank you. Thank you, Matthew countered, drawing her into his arms, for giving me a family again, for making this house a home. As they sat together, watching the embers glow, Willow thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west with nothing but hope and the promise of a new beginning. She had found hardship, yes, but also strength she never knew she possessed. And most precious of all, she had found love not just with Matthew, but in the family they were building together. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the ranch in a blanket of white. Inside, the house was warm with love and the promise of the future. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Reynolds, Matthew whispered, his hand resting gently on the curve of her belly where their child grew. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Reynolds," Willow replied, leaning into his embrace. "The first of many." And as the snow continued to fall outside their window, Willow Nielsen Reynolds knew with absolute certainty that the hope she had clung to through her darkest days had indeed been transformed into something far more precious: a home, a family, and a love that would sustain her through all the seasons of life to come. Spring arrived early the following year, bringing new life to the ranch. Calves frolicked in the pastures, the garden burst into bloom, and Willow's figure grew rounder with each passing week. By May, she had slowed considerably, limiting her activities to the house and immediate yard while Matthew and Tommy handled the more strenuous ranch work. One warm afternoon, as Willow sat on the porch mending shirts, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced visitors. She shaded her eyes, watching as two riders approached. "Matthew," she called toward the corral where her husband was training a young horse. "Someone's coming." Matthew was beside her in moments, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle kept by the door. Since the cattle rustling incidents the previous year, he'd remained cautious about unexpected visitors. As the riders drew closer, Willow recognized Clayton Blackburn. The other man was a stranger, expensively dressed and riding a fine bay horse. "Stay here," Matthew said quietly, stepping off the porch to meet them. "Reynolds," Blackburn called as they reined in. "Hope we're not intruding." "What brings you this way, Blackburn?" Matthew's tone was civil but cool. "Business proposition." Blackburn dismounted, followed by his companion. "This is Harold Smithfield, representing the Arizona Land and Cattle Company." The name meant nothing to Willow, but she saw Matthew's shoulders tense. "Mr. Reynolds," Smithfield said, extending a hand that Matthew briefly shook. "Your reputation precedes you. I understand you run one of the most efficient operations in the county." "We do all right," Matthew replied cautiously. "More than all right, according to the numbers I've seen," Smithfield continued. "Which is why we're here. The company is interested in acquiring quality properties in this region." "Not interested in selling," Matthew said flatly. Smithfield smiled thinly. "Perhaps you should hear our offer before declining. The company is prepared to pay significantly above market value for both your ranch and the adjoining Reed property." Willow rose from her chair, moving to stand beside Matthew despite his earlier instruction. "The Reed property belongs to me," she said clearly, "and it's not for sale either." Blackburn's gaze shifted to her, taking in her advanced pregnancy. "Mrs. Reynolds," he acknowledged with a nod, "we understand your attachment to the land, but surely you must consider what's best for your growing family." "We are considering it," Matthew said, his voice hardening. "Which is why we're not interested in selling our home to become part of some company's empire." Smithfield sighed, as if dealing with particularly stubborn children. "The future of ranching in this territory lies with organized operations, Mr. Reynolds. Individual ranchers simply can't compete with the economies of scale that companies like ours can achieve." "We manage just fine," Willow said, feeling a flare of indignation. "Our cattle fetch top prices and our expenses are carefully managed." "For now," Blackburn interjected. "But the railroad's pushing farther west. New markets are opening up that will demand more cattle than small operations can provide." "Then we'll expand," Matthew countered, "on our own terms." Smithfield exchanged a glance with Blackburn. "The offer remains open for 30 days, he said, producing an envelope from his coat pocket. "I suggest you review it carefully before making your final decision." Matthew took the envelope but made no move to open it. "Is that all, for now?" Smithfield mounted his horse with practiced ease. "Think about your family's future, Reynolds. That's all we ask." As the two men rode away, Willow felt a chill despite the warm spring day. "What was that about, really?" Matthew's jaw was tight as he watched them disappear down the road. "The company's been buying up ranches all across the territory. They move in, offer good money, and most folks take it. Those who don't often find themselves facing mysterious problems, water rights disputes, cattle disappearing, that sort of thing. You think they'd threaten us?" Willow's hand moved protectively to her belly. "Not openly." Matthew put his arm around her shoulders. "But we should be vigilant. That night, after Tommy had gone to bed, they discussed the offer. The sum was indeed generous enough to start over somewhere else with a comfortable cushion. "We could go north," Matthew suggested, though Willow could tell his heart wasn't in it. "Oregon, maybe. Good cattle country there too," Willow shook her head. "This is our home, Matthew, our legacy for our children." She took his hand and placed it on her rounded abdomen where the baby kicked vigorously. "I don't want to run." A slow smile spread across Matthew's face. "That's my girl." He leaned over to kiss her. "We won't run, but we'll need to be smarter, stronger than they expect." The next day, Matthew rode into town to speak with Sheriff Tanner and several other ranchers. He returned with news that bolstered Willow's determination. "We're not alone," he reported over supper. The Tanner brothers, Old Man Hawkins, and the Perez family all got similar visits. "None of them are selling either." "Strength in numbers," Willow observed. "Exactly." Matthew's eyes gleamed with purpose. "We're forming an association pooling resources for hiring extra hands during roundup, negotiating better prices with the railroad, that sort of thing." "Sheriff's brother-in-law is a lawyer in Tucson. He's drawing up the papers." Tommy, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "What can I do to help?" Matthew ruffled the boy's hair. "Keep your eyes open, report anything unusual, and keep practicing with that rifle. You're getting to be quite a shot." In the weeks that followed, a new sense of camaraderie developed among the independent ranchers of the area. Sunday gatherings after church became strategy sessions. Women exchanged recipes and preserving techniques to help each family stretch their resources. Men organized rotating patrols to watch for rustlers or other trouble. June arrived, bringing with it sweltering heat and the imminent arrival of the Reynolds baby. Dr. Parker began making weekly visits to the ranch, his face growing more concerned each time he examined Willow. "The baby's positioned awkwardly," he explained to Matthew after one such examination. "And Mrs. Reynolds is smaller than I'd like. I'm concerned about complications." Willow, overhearing from the bedroom, called out, "I'm stronger than I look, doctor. We'll be fine." The doctor smiled tiredly. "Your spirit is admirable, Mrs. Reynolds, but I'd feel better if you were closer to town as your time approaches." After much discussion, they agreed that Willow would move to Mrs. Holloway's hotel for the final weeks. Matthew arranged for one of the bedrooms to be converted into a temporary home, with Tommy staying at the ranch to help with the daily chores. The separation was difficult. Though Matthew rode into town every evening, Willow missed the ranch fiercely. She spent her days knitting baby clothes and writing detailed instructions for Tommy about tending her garden. "You're supposed to be resting," Matthew chided one evening, finding her at the small desk writing yet another list. "I am resting," Willow protested. "My body is resting. My mind needs occupation or I'll go mad with waiting." Matthew sat on the edge of the bed, taking her hands in his. "The ranch is fine. Tommy is fine. Everything will be waiting for you when you come home with our child." "I know," Willow sighed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I just feel so useless here." "You're doing the most important work right now," Matthew said, his hand moving to her belly. "Growing our future." On the night of June 17th, Willow's labor began. Mrs. Holloway sent a boy racing for Dr. Parker while she helped Willow walk the floor, timing the contractions that came with increasing frequency. By the time Matthew arrived, Willow was deep in the grip of labor, her face pale with pain and effort. "I'm here," he whispered, taking her hand. "I'm right here." The hours that followed tested Willow's strength like nothing before. As dawn broke, Dr. Parker's face grew grim. "The baby isn't turning," he explained to Matthew in the hallway, his voice low. "We may have to make some difficult decisions." Willow, hearing this, called out with what strength she had left. No difficult decisions. This baby is coming the natural way." Whether it was her determination or divine intervention, something shifted in the next hour. With a final, tremendous effort, Willow brought their daughter into the world just as the morning sun filled the room with golden light. "A girl," Dr. Parker announced, his tired face breaking into a smile as the infant's lusty cry filled the room. "A perfect little girl." Matthew stood transfixed as the doctor placed the tiny, red-faced bundle in Willow's arms. "She's beautiful," he whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Like her mother. Hope, Willow said softly, counting the baby's fingers and toes with wonder. Hope Elizabeth Reynolds. Hope, Matthew echoed, understanding the significance of the name. It had been hope that brought Willow west, hope that had sustained her through loss and hardship, hope that had brought them together. A fine name for a strong girl, Dr. Parker approved, packing his instruments. She fought her way into this world, that's certain. Tommy arrived an hour later, having ridden into town at a gallop as soon as the ranch hand Matthew had sent with news reached him. He approached the bed where Willow lay with the baby with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "Would you like to hold your sister?" Willow asked gently. The boy's eyes widened. "Can I? I've never held a baby before." "Sit here," Matthew instructed, guiding Tommy to a chair beside the bed. "Support her head like this." The moment the infant was settled in Tommy's arms, a look of fierce protectiveness came over his young face. "She's so small," he marveled. "I'll teach her everything, I promise. How to ride and fish, and she'll need to grow a bit first," Willow laughed weakly. "I'll wait," Tommy declared solemnly. "I'm good at waiting." The family remained in town for 2 more weeks while Willow regained her strength. When they finally returned to the ranch, they found that the neighboring ranchers had banded together to complete the summer planting and tend to the cattle in their absence. "That's what neighbors do," Sheriff Tanner explained when Matthew tried to thank him. "Stand together when it counts." July brought searing heat, and the end of the 30-day period Smithfield had specified for considering their offer. Matthew was working in the barn when a cloud of dust announced visitors for the second time that summer. This time it was Smithfield alone, his expensive suit out of place against the dusty backdrop of the ranch. "Your answer is still no," Matthew said without preamble as the man dismounted. Smithfield nodded as if he'd expected nothing else. "Mr. Blackburn thought you might reconsider when you realized the implications of refusal." "And what implications are those?" Matthew's voice was dangerously quiet. "The company controls most of the water rights north of here now," Smithfield explained calmly. "And we've negotiated exclusive shipping rates with the railroad. Independent ranchers will find their profit margins significantly reduced next season. Are you threatening me on my own land?" Matthew took a step forward, his hands clenched at his sides. Smithfield backed up slightly. "Simply stating facts, Mr. Reynolds. Business is business." "And family is family," came Willow's voice from the porch, where she stood with Hope in her arms and Tommy at her side, rifle in hand. "We'll take our chances, Mr. Smithfield." The company man looked from Willow to Matthew, then shrugged. "As you wish, but don't say you weren't warned." He mounted his horse and turned to go, then paused. "One more thing, there have been reports of renegade Apache in the area. Might want to keep your family close to home." After he'd gone, Matthew joined Willow on the porch, his face tight with anger. "Empty threats. There haven't been hostile Apache in this region for years." "It doesn't matter," Willow said, handing the baby to him. "We've faced worse than corporate bullies." That night, they called a meeting of the neighboring ranchers at their home. Around the kitchen table, they shared what they knew of the company's tactics and made plans. "If they control the water north of here, we'll dig more wells," Old Man Hawkins declared. "I've got a knack for finding underground streams. And if they've bought off the railroad, we'll drive our herds farther to the next station," added Luis Perez. "It's only another 20 miles. We can rotate the drive," Matthew suggested. "Pool our cattle, take turns making the longer trip." By the time the meeting ended, they had the beginnings of a viable strategy. The ranchers departed with renewed determination, their unity strengthened by the common threat. As summer turned to fall, the Ranchers Association, as they now called themselves, put their plans into action. Wells were dug, securing independent water sources. A cooperative storehouse was established in town, allowing them to buy supplies in bulk at better prices. Most importantly, they formalized their cattle driving arrangement, creating teams that could efficiently move larger herds to the more distant railroad station. The company's response was predictable but ineffective. Minor acts of sabotage occurred: cut fences, scattered herds, but the ranchers' vigilance prevented any serious damage. When two men were caught tampering with the association's new well, Sheriff Tanner arrested them promptly. "Found papers on them linking them directly to the company," he reported to Matthew with satisfaction. "Judge Parker's issued a restraining order. Any more of their men caught on association lands will face serious charges." By December, it was clear that the independent ranchers had won the first battle. The company's representatives stopped appearing in Naco, focusing their efforts elsewhere in the territory. Christmas that year was a true celebration. Hope, now 6 months old and beginning to crawl, became the center of attention as the association families gathered at the Reynolds ranch for a feast that showcased the fruits of their cooperation. "To friendship and perseverance," Sheriff Tanner toasted, raising his glass. "And to the future of independent ranching in Arizona Territory." "Hear, hear," came the enthusiastic response. Later, as the guests departed and the house grew quiet, Willow and Matthew stood on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. Hope slept peacefully inside while Tommy helped Mrs. Holloway clean up the remnants of the feast. "Did you ever imagine this?" Matthew asked, his arm around Willow's waist. "When you first arrived in Naco," Willow leaned into his warmth. "Never. I came with nothing but hope and the address of a man I'd never met. And now," she turned to face him, her heart full, "now I have everything I never dared to dream of, a home that's truly mine, a family that grows more precious each day, and a husband who helped me turn that hope into something real and lasting." Matthew's eyes shone in the dim light from the windows. "I'm the fortunate one," he said softly. "You've brought life and purpose back to this land and to me." As they stood together under the vast Arizona sky, Willow thought of the long journey that had brought her to this moment. The losses that had seemed unbearable, the leap of faith that had carried her west, the unexpected gift of love that had transformed her life. Inside the house, Hope made a small sound in her sleep. Soon Tommy's voice could be heard, quietly reassuring the baby that her family was near. And Willow knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, with the same hope that had guided her from the beginning. For hope, she had learned, was not merely the absence of despair. It was the courage to believe in possibilities, the strength to build something new from the ashes of the old, and the wisdom to recognize love when it appeared in the most unexpected places. In the wild heart of Arizona Territory, Willow Nielsen Reynolds had found her true home at last.